Breathing in, I know I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I know I'm breathing out. Can relax my body, enjoy whatever's going on right now. And we'll start with the 3 sounds of the bell. Dear respected Thai, dear noble community, today is the 14th of July, Bastille Day in France. The 14th of July in the year 2021, and we are in the Ocean of Peace Meditation Hall in Deer Park Monastery. And we are on our 14th class of the 40 Tenets. For those of you who just arrived, this class has been kind of out of the crucible of the pandemic. It's been moving forward, and now we're opening up to guests for the past few weeks. And next week we have our summer retreat. So I know a lot of the staff are here as well. Thank you for coming and offering to serve and build community. Can you hear me clearly? Is it okay? So we are studying the 14th tenet of the Plum Village tradition. Mindfulness, concentration, and insight include each other. Can you see? Is it too light? Concentration. And insight. Include each other. all three have the capacity to bring joy, happiness, and liberation. So we've been learning about mindfulness, concentration and insight, which we call the 3 Paintless trainings. It means that no matter how much you practice mindfulness, concentration and insight, they won't become sticky. They have the quality of leading to freedom and joy. And that's actually quite rare in the world, because most things that we put a lot of our attention into, we become attached to. So the quality of mindfulness, concentration and insight, when they're right mindfulness, right concentration, and right view or right insight, is the quality of not being, not causing attachment. They are like you put your hand out and the air, and you don't, there's no obstruction. And it also means that in our mind, there isn't a kind of longing or craving for any of them. We don't long for mindfulness. Oh, if I could only be mindful. That's a wrong understanding of mindfulness. Mindfulness is only here in the present moment. It's not something that you wish you can have. Like you can long to go to the beach and go surfing, or you can long to go back to your hometown and see your family. But mindfulness doesn't cause longing. It causes you, right mindfulness means coming back to what's going on right here and now. And doing that brings joy right away. The same is true of concentration and insight. So we can look at them like kind of three points. Just do for short. And they are not separate. They are leading to one another. By bringing my attention back to the breath, I cultivate concentration. I cannot be truly mindful of my breathing without concentration. Concentration is a necessary element for mindfulness. And insight is also necessary. When I'm aware of my breath, insight is present. I'm aware of the feeling of the breath. I'm aware of the changing sensation of the breath. I'm aware of the physiological process of the breathing. That's insight. There is breath. That is an insight. The realization of the presence of the breath is itself an insight. Sometimes we think of insight as something very complicated, very complex, something we have to work our whole life to attain. And that is a wrong perception. Insight can be touched right now, just where you're sitting, at home, those of you online, or if you're here, you're just aware of your legs. That is an insight. So there's mindfulness. I have 2 legs in good condition, and I can walk, I can stand up, sit down. Not everyone has 2 legs in good condition, but I can have with mindfulness, I can be aware of my 2 legs and appreciate that they are in good condition. That is right away a condition of happiness. It's not very complicated. So usually insight is just recognizing the wonders of life that are already there. But because of our thinking, our concepts, our worries, our anxiety, we forget. So mindfulness helps us to come back and get the insight of what is there in the present moment, especially the good conditions. But we also get insight to suffering. So we talked about how the mindfulness trainings in the Plum Village tradition all start with awareness, aware of the suffering. That is one of the key aspects of the Plum Village tradition. It's not just not killing, but aware of the suffering that is caused by the destruction of life. I am determined not to kill. So we talked about that last time. When we go to the sea marsh down by La Jolla, for example, there are many beautiful birds, seabirds, and that area has become protected. And in the past, we would just see a sign that says, "Do not enter." And we don't know why. And so people go in there and they throw trash and they defile that area. But if we put a sign and explain how this habitat is very rare and many birds take refuge in that marsh to build their nests, to eat fish, to feed their young, then we have compassion, we have understanding. So we don't put trash there, we don't defile the water that goes into that marsh. So that's the insight of the mindfulness trainings, awareness of suffering. So the first noble truth, aware of suffering, is built in to the trainings. So Thich reflected on all of this and got input from the community and developed this way of practicing the precepts. So with awareness, there's also insight. Mindful of suffering, I get the insight into the nature of suffering. If there's no insight, it's not right mindfulness. I remember in 2014, in the 21-day retreat, and there were many Dhamma teachers, lay Dhamma teachers, monastic Dhamma teachers, and Thich called them all, and he wanted us to sit in front during a talk that he gave, and it was around the question of whether we can teach mindfulness in the military. And Thich affirmed very strongly, we should teach mindfulness, even in places where there is like the military, where they are trained to kill. People are asking, if I'm more mindful of shooting, does that make me a better killer? And Thich said very clearly, mindfulness is not a tool. Mindfulness is a path. So when we teach a soldier mindfulness, they also get insight and concentration. And that insight helps them to see the suffering that is caused by killing. It's not only about training to shoot the gun, but it has an effect psychologically. And they look deeper into themselves, and with time, the insight can start to grow stronger and stronger. The pain that is caused by killing, by training human beings to see others as just objects to kill. So Thich was quite strong. He said, yes, we can teach mindfulness, but not as a tool, as a way, as a path. Because right mindfulness is inextricable from the other trainings. When we start to talk about mindfulness that is used for getting a better test score, being mindful so that I can get rid of the unease I have around my job, maybe where I cause some kind of suffering in my way of the products that I produced, or maybe in my way of interacting with my colleagues. That is not right mindfulness. Of course, we can use drugs, we can find ways to enhance our body so that we can see more clearly, think more clearly. But if those thoughts are thoughts of anger, hatred, or jealousy, then it's not right mindfulness. So we don't practice mindfulness to attain a goal, but we get the goal in the mindfulness itself. It's not separate. That is the beauty of the practice of aimlessness. So when you're younger, we maybe 14, 15 years old, and we look at the world and we see all the grown-ups doing really important things, very busy, getting jobs, getting a career, making money, raising a family, and we think, this is it. And so we just find ways to get a better job, to have a better family, a better partner, and all these things. And we don't have a chance to look inside and say, am I really experiencing happiness in the present moment? If I really feel joy, am I able to generate a feeling of joy wherever I am, or whenever? That's the quality of mindfulness, because it comes with concentration. So it's joy and happiness born from mindfulness. Joy and happiness born from concentration. Joy and happiness born from insight, not from getting what we ordered on Amazon or going to the beach. Those are all things, it's fine. You order something on Amazon or you go to the beach, it's no problem. But it's the longing, it's the missing something, not having enough in the present moment, and then trying to enhance or optimize our pleasure, right? That's our pleasure seeking. We can listen to a sound of the bell. So we know that in this planet Earth, there are finite resources. And for the past 150 years, we have been using resources like never before. And anyone who looks with mindfulness, concentration, and insight can see we cannot go on like this. And we need more people to train in mindfulness, concentration, and insight. We need you, all of you, to teach mindfulness, concentration, and insight. We can build and install more solar panels. We can try to end our dependence on fossil fuels. We can find ways to protect biodiversity. But what we really need most deeply are resilient and happy, free mindfulness practitioners who are in community, who are working together, because we know that mindfulness without community is only so strong. Thay's vision for this century is awakening as a community. And so that means that we take turns sharing the Dhamma with each other, sharing our experience, living together in community, finding ways to overcome our attachments, our worries, our anxieties. And that brings us happiness and joy, because the human race, we can find perhaps some kind of technology to help human beings to survive on earth. But if those human beings don't know how to be happy, don't know how to be free, well then we might ask ourselves, well, what is it for, just to survive on this planet, if we don't have freedom, if we don't have happiness? We have to look with a lot of care into our feelings. It's never easy when a society or a civilization faces a decline, faces when it comes against its limits, its environmental limits, its economic limits. And we need to look in our daily life and see, what do we take refuge in? Do we take refuge in the government? Do we take refuge in institutions, in the law? Do we take refuge in the newspaper? Do we take refuge in our favorite television show? Wherever we are putting our attention, that is our place of refuge. So when we suffer, then we go to that place. It could be the refrigerator. So mindfulness means getting the insight. Okay, I'm aware of what I'm doing throughout the day, and I see, why is it that I keep going to the fridge and taking that thing out to eat? What kind of emotion inside of me? What kind of feeling of despair, feeling of emptiness, fear, may be driving that action? When I go on the internet to read the newspapers, does that knowledge bring me security? Does it make my mind more stable? Does knowing who is President of the United States make my life more stable? What if there is no President of the United States? Are you able to be free and happy? Do you have that kind of solidity? What if suddenly there is no Supreme Court? I'm just speaking hypothetically. Imagine you're sitting there, maybe late in the 4th century in Rome, and somebody says, imagine that there's no emperor of Rome. And you say, no, how could such a thing be? It can never happen. There have been emperors for many centuries. What if there will be no government? It's just an example. We try to look and see what are those things that are creating stability that we are taking refuge in. So when we talk about taking refuge in the Buddha, in the Dhamma, and the Sangha, it means that we look at, in our daily life, what are we giving our attention to in order to find stability? Like, you read the newspaper and you say, yeah, it's the normal stories that I always know. And I feel, okay, I feel safe. The world is only on fire as much as it usually is. And we get used to it. Maybe 20 years ago, we would be horrified that the planet is heating up. It's very clear. But now we got used to it. It's normal. The planet's heating up. I know about that. Maybe 20 years ago, we would think, oh gosh, imagine if there was that one horrible brush fire in California. And now we think, how many brush fires will there be in California? And where will they be? And will it be next to my house? So over time, we become more and more accustomed to, if we're not mindful, we become accustomed to the suffering that we see outside. And the same is true inside. We become accustomed to our particular habit of suffering. And so in the community we say, like, my suffering. It might be like painful, but it's my suffering. And every time when something happens in the community, it's like a knee-jerk reaction. We know that brother or sister, they're going to say that thing. Because even though they suffer and they feel hurt, there's an attachment to the suffering. It's become a habit. And like clockwork, you say that thing, you do that thing, and that brother or sister, they say that. They are hurt, they share that thing. So we can, if we're not careful through our habit, we start to, without being mindful or aware of the suffering, we actually start to like the suffering. We don't really like it because it's very painful and it makes our life miserable. But it's familiar. It's something we know. And because we're looking for stability, we find it in our suffering. That reliable hurt, that reliable pain, that reliable way of that our loved one speaks to us, and then we react in that same way every time, back and forth. It's like a ping pong match that we know very well. So that is wrong. That is a lack of mindfulness. So the quality of mindfulness is to wake up to our habits, our conditioning. So we've been learning about klesha, affliction. And that these afflictions are tied together with the obstacle of knowledge. Klesha Vadana and Jneya Vadana, we take refuge in what we know, and that causes jealousy, fear. For example, we grow up and we construct an identity. It's very normal. It allows us to work in a predictable way with our family, with ourselves, with our colleagues. Now I'm a student, now I'm a college student, now I'm an investment banker, now I'm a husband, now I'm this or that. So we can fit into roles. But even though most of us, when we look inside, we say, I'm not truly that. I'm not truly just a husband. I'm not truly just an investment banker. I'm not truly just somebody who likes science fiction movies or whatever that we attach to our identity. But through habit, we take refuge in those qualities, those characteristics that we associate with me or myself. And in doing that, when somebody comes along and is better at being you than you are, they know, they've seen 100 times more science fiction movies than you have. They've made 100 times more money in investment banking than you have. They have a partner who is 100 times more beautiful than your partner. I don't know. Whatever, this is the measuring mind. You measure and you suffer because you want to be number one. Number one at that particular mix of qualities. Even if you're a monk or a nun, you want to be the super nun or super monk. The one who can give a Dhamma talk at any moment, upside down, doing yoga, in the middle of a pond. I don't know. I remember, we had one nun here, and I used to think she was a super nun because she would prepare the meal for hundreds of people in the kitchen, and then she would come down, she would make sure there was time to come down and watch Thai's Dhamma talk, because she didn't ever want to miss Thai's Dhamma talk. And then she would go back up, and she would have about maybe 45 minutes to finish making the soup and everything, which she had many lay friends helping her, and she would serve food for 400 or 500 people, and I would think, my goodness, she's a super nun. I can never be as good of a monk or nun as that. So we take on these qualities, we get attached to it. So when we talk about knowledge as an obstacle, it's tied up with our sense of ourself, what we believe ourselves to be. And when we can feel, that gives rise to feelings of jealousy. We start to compare ourself with another self, our perception of another person. We start to feel angry when the way we think ourselves to be is not in accord with what we observe in reality. Maybe we're, very mindful monk or nun, but we walk along and we don't see the tree branch and we hit our head and fall over. And everybody sees us do it and they think, oh gosh, my idea of my mindful practice is not in accord with the reality. This kind of thing. So knowledge can give rise to affliction. So the afflictions are usually the symptom to some attachment at a lower level in our mind, some kind of thing we're grasping onto. In Buddhist psychology, we talk about the non-existence of the grasper and the grasped. So it means there's no one grasping, there's no grasping, there's no one grasper and nothing grasped. Or nothing to grasp. And as we now have more sophisticated, or I could say, I don't know, sophisticated, but we have more new mechanical ways of measuring the firing of neurons in our brain. When we're doing certain tasks, we can see that actually what appears is that there are whole patterns of neurons which are firing in synchrony with other neurons. And one group of them are behaving like the subject, and the other group of them are behaving like the object. So whenever we attend to something, you have certain neurons, they are functioning as the grasper, and then you have other neurons which are functioning as the grasped. In reality, without looking deeply, we just think, oh, well, I want to pick up this marker. And so I reach out and I pick it up. But actually what's happening in my mind is there's a model of me. I see through the photons reflecting off this marker, through my retina and my optic nerve into my brain, which then corresponds to all other kinds of markers I've experienced before in my life. And so I get the perception through conditioning that this is something that I can take a cap off of and I can write with it. And so motor neurons in my brain then model my hand moving up over to the board and picking up the marker. But actually, in my mind, I've already picked up the marker. There's already a grasper and a grasp, something to grasp. So that serves its functional purpose. This person who is somehow somewhere in this body, who is reaching out to grasp the marker. There's one interesting philosopher, I don't think I remember his name right now, but he said he suddenly realized that he was headless. Because actually what he experiences, he doesn't see his head, he sees his hands and he sees chest and a body, but there's no head. I mean, he could feel something here, but when he looks out, it's just, actually when we look out, we just see chest and feet and arms. You see a head, so you think he's crazy. How can he say he's headless? But actually our lived experience has a quality of being headless. And so that's another way of looking at Buddhist psychology, which is that actually everything is a process in the body, and there's no commander in chief. There's no self there. But we take refuge in things we like, things we dislike, things we think we are, things we think we aren't. And by kind of accumulating all of these qualities, we start to think, this is me, this is myself. But with mindfulness, concentration, and insight, you just see this wondrous experience of, wow, wow, wow. It's just nameless and formless awareness. And so that's what these trainings are inviting us to do, to come back and just let go of all those ideas and concepts and just, like, my goodness, what is going on here? Sometimes people take hallucinogenics or something to get a similar effect, but with meditation we can go deeper. We can actually cultivate this as a way of being. So we stop thinking, this is me, myself, and mine. We start to notice how we are creating a grasper and a grasp through conditioning. So this teaching on no grasper and nothing to grasp is a training to help us to be free of the conditioning caused by our constant grasping. So we recognize that actually there's nothing to grasp finally, and that what we do in our daily lives is cultivate grasping, the quality of grasping at things that bring us pleasure, and trying to avoid things that are causing us pain, which is another kind of grasping. So it's grasping at things that bring pleasure. Grasping also is at things that keep us away from painful things. Grasping at being and non-being, we call it. Like, I want to be a happy person. We want to be a happy person, so we cultivate the image of happiness. We smile, we laugh, we're joyful all the time. We never want to say or show any indication that we're not happy. But inside ourselves, there's also the seed of sadness, of worry, of regret. But we don't want to look at that seed. We just project happiness all the time because we want to be a happy person. And so our happiness becomes an obstacle to our true happiness. That's how knowledge becomes an obstacle. We get attached to the idea of a happy person. And we smile and so forth. But in ourselves, we don't recognize there are also seeds of despair, of trauma, of fear in the body, in our mind. And they are crying out for our attention, for our care. We need to be aware of them, because we know that true happiness comes from understanding our despair, understanding our fear, understanding that anger that is we so strongly want to avoid. So grasping at non-being means I'm not a sad person. I'm not an angry person. We might not say that, but that's what we feel, what we tell ourselves. Now I'm holding 3 markers. Too much grasping. We fear the anger and we fear the despair, and so we need to we're grasping at a non-being of fear, grasping at a non-being of anger. We want to push it away. refuse to acknowledge its existence. Put it in a room, lock the door. But it's banging at the door. And if we learn to accept the anger, accept that despair into our awareness, then we actually understand that it is of an organic nature. It's not something to be rejected, but it's something to be understood. So suffering, awareness of suffering is not for the purpose of pushing suffering away, but it's for the purpose of understanding our despair, our anger. So with mindfulness, when Thai teaches us that these three are interconnected, it's also to help us to stop grasping at concentration or grasping at insight. We think we don't have enough insight, so we read many books, we try to accumulate lots of knowledge to sound intelligent and impress people. But actually inside there's just a suffering child. Inside there's that boy that could not get his parents to stop fighting and closed the door of his room and sat in there, waiting for it to be over. Inside there is that little girl who is hurt because her friends said something that hurt her, rejected her from the social group when she was in elementary school. Inside us there is someone who only wants to be loved, appreciated, and we, in order to get it, we need to accumulate all of this knowledge, accumulate all of these qualities that we feel are desirable. And so we wear out our body and we wear out our mind trying to get those things. Cars, houses, even titles, degrees, careers, respect, dignity. You can listen to the sound of the bell. So when we practice in community, we are there to remind each other. Because we all know that we have that wounded child in our heart. And that many of the things that we've done growing up, living in the world, are a fruit of the hurt of that little child. Not just one thing, but many things. We felt misunderstood. We felt like we received a great injustice. We were not understood by our parents, our teachers, our friends. But when we look deeply and we are able to embrace all of those events, to let them in as part of this experience of living in the present moment. So it means our past is there in the present moment. Because we know that the future is also there in the present moment. What we will experience in the future depends on what's happening in the present moment. So the capacity that we have to embrace all of that wounded child, to take his or her hand and go for a walk in the forest or in the mountain. Some of us may reach out to hold the hand of ourselves as a 5-year-old child and find that that 5-year-old child doesn't want to take our hand. And so you might try to look and see, what is it? Why? Why will he not take my hand? It's an interesting question. What is it that I have not yet understood about myself as a 5-year-old child? When I reach out my hand, will he also take my hand? That's something I do sometimes. I do sometimes the children's program in Plum Village. And sometimes I put out my hand and the child reaches up and is very happy and we walk along. But sometimes I reach out my hand and the child is not ready. So I think, okay. And so I don't ask myself, why does that child not take my hand? But I ask myself, what is it in me, that 5-year-old child in me, which doesn't want to take my hand? How am I living my life in a way that is not dealing with the suffering that that child, myself as a 5-year-old, 8-year-old child, 12-year-old child, what unresolved trauma or suffering is still not being embraced by the way I'm living my daily life? In what ways is that pain, that suffering still expressing itself in the way that I speak, in the way that I think? And I continue to transmit that suffering because I haven't learned to understand that pain. That is the practice. And that's what we do together. It's so much easier to do it together in community. Because my younger brothers, they remind me all the time. Sometimes they're a little bit, afraid because it's an older brother, but then later they get to know me and then it's easier. And they say, okay, I can tell him this, I can tell him that. And we as older brothers, we have to learn, okay, I have to be, more accepting. Maybe if I say that, they'll think I'm angry or, and because that's actually an insight. Insight doesn't only happen within ourselves. It also comes from around us, if we are able to listen. When we were walking up from the gate this evening, at some point we stopped and we heard the coyotes singing in the mountain. And if you've been to Deer Park, you may have heard the coyotes singing. And this time there were many, many coyotes. Maybe, I would guess maybe 8 or more. And you feel the community. It's like, okay guys, this is the moment. I'm going to tell you about my day. And you hear one coyote yapping and then another, and then before you know it, they're all singing, and they're actually creating a collective experience of their day, which may include killing a rabbit or a few rabbits. And at that moment we stopped and we thought, oh my gosh, the dog. Because we had Bako, who's been staying here. We don't usually have dogs in the monastery, but this is a special exception. This dog, Bako, is going back to Germany. So with No Kong's family. And so we thought, oh my gosh, the coyotes, Bako, where's Bako? And Bako was fine, don't worry. But that can be a kind of insight. And we in that moment we look and say, is this, we learn not to discriminate. That's sort of the beauty of receiving messages from the world outside. Usually we say, oh, that's a good thing, that's a bad thing. We like the sound of the coyotes, but then we think, oh gosh, the dog. Did they attack the dog? And then what was a beautiful thing becomes a scary thing. But then we find the dog and then we think, oh, a good thing again. But then we find out that coyotes have killed a rabbit. And we think, oh, it's not a good thing. But when we calm our mind and we become free from knowledge of good and bad, then what is there? It's just the singing of the coyotes. Just that raw experience that is communicating something to us in real time. It's not something to be, like, we don't allow ourselves to get caught in the perceptions about the coyote singing. But we return to the raw experience of that. What is being transmitted here? I don't know. I'm experiencing it. I'm listening to the sound of the coyotes. So that is where we learn to put down the barrier between the outside and the inside. Thinking of things as outside the body, thinking of things as inside the body. Because we have this body and I can move my arm very quickly, so I have the experience that this is the limit of my body. At the tip of my fingertip, the body ends. It's no longer, it cannot be extended farther. But that's a very simplistic way of looking at things. With the insight of non-self, when we practice becoming free from our ideas about this body is me, these feelings are me, these perceptions are me, then we see that we are life without limit. That none of us is a separate self. That we are not separate from each other, we are not separate from the coyotes. You are standing up here giving the Dhamma talk, it's not me. You see, there's a kind of flow. So we become free from the obstacles of knowledge, of self, of these accretions of concepts that form habits in our our mind and body, and in our body. So there are blocks of suffering in our body. Body and mind are together. So with mindfulness, concentration, and insight, there's a kind of we re-establish a circulation in our body and mind. So those blocks, it's like they have an organic nature and they start to become loose, and then the circulation continues. And then we see it's not only the block in my body, but it's also outside the body. And so then we start to have a sense of letting go of this idea that this body is the limit. That actually through our thinking, through our speech, through our actions, we are continuing out into the world. I like to draw a kind of like an orange tree that has many flowers. And then the flowers become the fruit of the orange. Down here at the base of the mountain, we have many orange trees on our neighbor's land. And so sometimes I walk by them and I look up. And that reminds me, I see, if I take good care of the soil of my mind, then the flowers and the fruit, the thought, the actions, the speech are also nourishing, tasty, sweet, beautiful. But if I don't take care with what I take refuge in, if I take refuge in things that bring about attachment, bring about anxiety, worry, it doesn't mean that by reading the newspaper that I'm not nourishing the soil of my mind, because we can learn to understand the suffering in the world by listening deeply. But if we let that suffering water our seed of despair, water our seed of anger, then we cannot do very much about the situation. So we have to be a skillful gardener and know how to take care of the soil, take care of where we plant the orange tree, take care of the water. No, I learned that in this area, wherever the laurel sumac grows, that is a place where you can plant an orange tree, because the laurel sumac cannot grow in a place that has a hard frost. So when the farmers who came to Escondido, whenever they saw the laurel sumac growing, then they would plant an orange tree there. But if they saw part of the mountain or part of the valley where the laurel sumac doesn't grow, they would not plant the orange tree there. Well, some of them did, and they had to, in the cold nights of the winter, they had to bring these kind of stoves and put them around the tree. And so you would actually see flames heating the tree. They used burnt wood to heat the tree, to keep it from the frost in the middle of the night. So that's the kind of awareness that we can get when we stop seeing ourselves as this is me inside this body, and out there that is somebody else, something else outside. Because in the study of the collapse of society, one insight is that the spoken word, oral tradition, is one of the most resilient forms of transmitting culture. More resilient than books, certainly more resilient than the internet. But we don't know yet, because those are things that are new technologies. But for tens of thousands of years, we have been able to transmit culture, sustainability, through the word, the spoken word. That is very powerful. So as students of the Dhamma, it's very difficult conditions happening in the world, on Mother Earth right now. It's very painful. So many things happening at the same time. The destruction of biodiversity, pushing our resources to the absolute limit to sustain human life on the planet. Global warming, the climate crisis. So many things happening at the same time. If we don't learn how to really be calm, really touch joy and happiness in ourselves, learn how to live simply and take refuge in community. So many people are living more isolated than ever in human history, cut off from their communities, in boxes, in apartment complexes, but they don't know their neighbors. They find refuge in media. They have forgotten how to sing the communal songs. They have forgotten how to tell the story of our life on earth. Every community has a story, and the stories of each community intermingle with the stories of other communities. And these stories continue down through history, and they are stories which bring resilience, they bring understanding of the earth. And we've replaced them with stories of destruction. The Hollywood movie formula. The one hero, usually white, male, saving the world from everyone else. So we went from the place of community to a place of this crazy vigilante who always seems to be the hero of every movie, and mainly what he does the entire movie is kill everyone else. And that is a symptom of our society, of what we're thinking, the collective consciousness. So we cultivate the image of this kind of hero, this individual who will save the world. And by doing that, we cut ourselves off from community. We think, I'll just do it myself. Instead of reconciling, learning to understand our brothers and sisters, our siblings, our community, we just, inside ourselves, we cultivate the image of some kind of, hero, individual who will save everything. And we look for a president who will save us. We look for a partner who will save us from our trauma. We look for a psychologist. We look for a monk who will save us from our suffering. And then we are no longer free. So, this is all for us to just look deeply and see, how do we do this? Like, how do we build community that can withstand, not just withstand for the purpose of surviving, but with joy. Stand with joy. Stand with happiness. In what is to come, the difficulties that will come. And there will be difficulties in the world. There will also be joy and happiness. But we need to, for our own freedom and happiness, learn how to cultivate these qualities and shine light on one another. Learn to be Dhamma brothers and sisters. It doesn't mean very much just to be reading books about the Dhamma and memorizing all Pali and Sanskrit terms. I mean, we do it for fun. I use some of these terms so we have a sense of continuity with this long tradition which has continued for 2,600 years, which is a tradition of resilience, of communities of resistance who did not believe in the mainstream story of consumption, of power, of killing, of wealth, and so forth, who wanted to live a life of community, a life of simplicity, a life of joy. So we have the ancestors, they've already prepared everything. We just need to practice, as Thai would often say. When you look inside, you see you have many conditions for happiness. And that's what we will go into next week. Well, in 2 weeks. We touched it already here, but the 15th tenet, recognizing through awareness of suffering all the conditions of happiness that are already there. Okay, thank you for your practice, and I wish you a wonderful week with all the families and teens and tweens coming to take refuge in the mountain and in this beautiful monastery this coming week. And I hope all of you online will be soon here with us at Deer Park, practicing in person. see, for those of us joining online, next week there will not be class. You cannot hear me, huh? I don't know, I didn't touch anything. So for those of us, camera's not looking this way. For those of us joining online, next week we will not have the class because we have the summer retreat for 1 week, and we'll continue it the following week, so in 2 weeks, for the class on the 15th tenet. Thank you.